Hello, good morning. So today I'm going to share my experience on how to maintain productivity and action quality in hot environments. And I thank PlusVet for the opportunity to give this talk to you. So we'll have a small introduction about the importance of heat stress all over the world. Then I want to explain the mechanism of heat stress and the Gaussian metabolism, because if we talk about layers and eggshell, that's very important to understand. And then specifically the effects of heat stress on laying birds, because it has to do with egg production and quality, but it also has to do with intestinal health, immune response, and food safety. And then I want to give you some tools and things that can help to support layers in hot climates. So if we look at the map of the world and then at the different climate zones, you can see with me that a lot of poultry production in the world is done in areas with hot climate. So a lot of people dealing with or doing poultry production and have layer hens have to deal with these problems of heat stress. And worldwide, and that is a figure that concerns all animal species, is that heat stress is costing a lot of money. They calculate globally more than $300 billion a year. And if you look at poultry production, I guess it's not going to get better. First of all, there is a climate change, and then we are dealing through selection each time with birds that themselves produce more heat, specifically in the broilers, but also in the layers it has an effect, and that's what we will elucidate further on. Then the other thing is that the way you can deal with heat stress also depends on the climate, of course, but on your housing system. And we know also worldwide that there's a big difference between the different housing systems that we have. Some have mechanical ventilation, others are very automated. Sometimes the houses are open, sometimes they are closed. So all this is to be taken into account to have good climate control. And when we talk about heat stress, it should be very clear that we're not only talking temperature. We are talking temperature humidity index, because that is going to determine the comfort zone for your chicken. It's when you have high temperature and also high humidity, it becomes more difficult, and the comfort zone for your birds is going to be more close to heat stress. So in general, we can say that the thermal neutral zone for adult chicken is between 18 and 25 degrees. Keep that in mind, because you will see when should I start doing things about heat stress. And that's well, as soon as you come above that 25, and then depending on what is happening on the humidity side, of course. And as a rule of state, I would say that the sum of your temperature and relative humidity gives you, for the comfort zone, 90 plus the age of chicken. That's mainly when we talk about the broiler birds, but the same goes more or less for the layer birds. And then when are we coming in the danger zone? Because that is what we want to determine. We know when it becomes difficult for the birds, but when is really the danger zone? When your temperature is high and also high humidity, then you will have the biggest problem. And also, the danger zone, if you look throughout the 24 hours of the day, for the birds, is not really when the temperature is at its highest, but later on. So that the period when we will see most mortality, for example, from heat stress, if the hottest period of the day is noon, it will not be just at noon, it will be later on in the afternoon. And that is also what you need to take into account when you take management measures for heat stress. Here I've given you some information from different publications where you can see that specifically for layers, you have, depending again on the humidity, but that should be between 50 and 70. That's where you can still control, and the temperature between 21 and 28. High humidity gives you, even at lower temperatures than 28 degrees, can give you problems. So let's have a closer look on the mechanism of heat stress in poultry and calcium metabolism, specifically looking at eggshell formation. And because this seems rather complicated, but the thing is, it starts with heat stress. Again, the effect that it's going to have on the chicken depends on the intensity. And so how high is the temperature, how high is relative humidity? Also, how long does it last? Is it like in our country, it's usually just a few days in a year that we really have problems. In some countries, it's the chicken are born with some kind of heat stress or high temperatures, high humidity for the rest of their lives. So that's a different way of coping. So the chicken will try to respond to that. And a lot of things happen. There's a behavioral response, there's a physiological response to cope with this critical condition. There's also an immunological response. And to some point, chicken can cope. But then comes a time when it becomes distressed. You will see impaired functioning and also immunosuppression. And that is really the critical uncomfortable zone that we need to take into account and see when we need to take action. So as a result of the heat stress, we can say you have lots of things happening, chicken cope or do not cope. And then in the end, you will have a disturbed function, not only behavior, not only physiology or metabolism, also immunosuppression. And the result is that both in layers as in broilers, we get reduced performance. So a little bit more in detail, the response to the heat stress by chicken, as we said, there's a behavioral change, and they will feel less inclined to eat. They drink more. They start panting, and this panting will have a consequence on the physiological changes. And if the heat lasts long, they will not move anymore. And you can see some, they will try to get rid of heat by opening their wings also. And then as a response to that, you get physiological changes, a lot of oxidative stress. There's an imbalance in the acid-base metabolism. We get respiratory alkalosis. We get a change in the cecal microbial profile, because there's a change also. This heat stress specifically has an effect on the intestinal health, and we will come to that later. But on the response of the neuroendocrine changes, we see that this is really, you get a stress reaction. That means that you get a lot of cortical secretions, adrenocorticotropic hormone goes up, catecholamines also, and you have plasma cortisol that is elevated. Also an effect on the hormones regulating the reproductive system. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are also affected by heat stress, and the result is the change in production. In a very bad situation, you get mortality, feed intake goes down, so that affects performance. You will get reduced body weight, you will get a decrease also in the quality of the meat because of the heat. And there will be, if you look at layers, there will be less eggs, and it will also affect the quality of the egg. So in general, we can say lots of things happening, but it's a big stress reaction and it has an effect on performance. How can chicken get rid of the heat? Chicken are not mammals, so there's a difference there, and chickens have a lot of feathers. So the main thing, they also can't sweat. So the main way they get rid of heat is by evaporating, by panting, really. Is also by vasodilatation, to open the vessel so that they can get rid of the heat, but it's in fact not so effective because you have all these feathers around. Also by conduction, so that means if they can get in touch with cooler places, that is also something that will help. Convection is also important, and radiation. So that means that all that heat that accumulates around the chicken, we have to try to get rid of it. So the consequences, if we look at the physiological changes that happen, or the metabolic changes, is that because of this evaporating cooling and the panting, almost the only way they really can get rid of heat is that there's a lot of carbon dioxide that will be evaporated, but that means that you get, by this increase in air exchange, you get a respiratory alkalosis. The amount of hydrogen is going down, and you get respiratory alkalosis. The pH will go up. Then, for the rest of the body, that's the main thing what is happening. In the rest of the body, there are some muscle contractions in the beginning to try to get rid of this heat. And that will, on the contrary, give you metabolic acidosis, but that is not so important as the respiratory alkalosis. And what does that mean for the quality of the egg shell? We get this disruption of the acid-base balance that I just explained, and the result is that you get less diffusible calcium available to form that shell, because you get a shift in the pH through the hyperventilation. The blood pH increases, alkalosis, and the result is that the activity of carbonic anhydrases, which is an enzyme that is critical for the shell formation, goes down. And so you get less usable, available calcium in the blood to form, that can go to the shell gland, and that's why we get thin and weak eggshells. So that's about the mechanism of heat stress and calcium metabolism. Let's have a closer look at the effects of heat stress on laying birds, because it will not only affect egg production and quality, also intestinal health, immune response, and food safety. Because the paradox of this heat stress is that when we have heat stress, behavior will reduce feed intake. So that means that you get less ingredients there. On top of that, heat stress is going to make your absorption in the gut different, because you get a leaky gut. At the same time, you get some inflammation, and you get activation of the immune system. So that means through all that, you already have reduced feed intake, but you also have, because of activation of your immune system, increased nutrient requirements. Because if you cannot do something about that, the result will be reduced performance. So here I want to show you, I think this is a very important slide for you to see what heat stress does to intestinal integrity and immunomodulation. Because we say heat stress gives you a leaky gut, and at the same time it activates the immune response. Because what heat stress affects the tight junctions, and these tight junctions are important to filter what is going through the top side of the epithelial cells. That's the lumen of your gut, where the nutrients come in and they can be absorbed with heat, and that goes through the cells. And the tight junctions are there to keep out the things that you don't want. In case of heat stress, those tight junctions are like open. The door is open to more pathogens. And also you get pro-inflammatory cytokines that are activated by these pathogens and further result in more inflammation. And inflammation, we know, costs energy, protein, and the result will be less performance, more pathogens that can pass this normal. And normally we have the intestinal barrier that is efficient to keep out pathogens. In this case, this is disrupted. We get more infections, like in layers. We definitely can see more polyvasculosis, for example, and also more risk for pathogens to pass the lumen, like for example, Salmonella. So that means heat stress is also going to increase your risk for food safety. Another very important thing that heat stress causes is that it damages and it causes oxidative stress to cells all over the body, and it starts in the gut. So we have dysfunction of the intestine, and through that, in fact, that has an effect on the rest of the organs, and this oxidative stress manifests in different organs, for example, the reproductive organs, and that is why that influences also the performance in layers, which is calculated in the amount of eggs, the weight of eggs, and the quality of the eggs. So, egg quality is affected by heat stress. Not only the shell strength, we already explained that, and thickness. It's definitely also going to be worse in older birds because their eggs become bigger, but the shell already becomes less, even if there's no heat stress. So in older birds, it will even be worse. So the effect on eggshell strength and thickness of the eggshell, egg weight. So in total, your egg mass by heat stress is going to be reduced. There's also an effect on the thickness of the albumen and the amount of albumen and on the yolk percentage. The other thing, we'll go back to our former slide here, effect on intestinal health. Gut barrier is disrupted, and it also has an effect on the intestinal microbiome. If there are different, and there's a different interaction between the bacteria in the lumen, so that disrupts your normal balance between the different strains of bacteria there, and that has an effect on microbiome and the community of bacteria that are there, which we like to be commensal, beneficial. In case of heat stress, that can deteriorate and become more attractive and more a situation where you have Enterobacteriaceae, Salmonella, E. coli, And it also has an effect on mineral metabolism, because less feed intake, that's one thing, but the whole disruption of the acid-base balance also makes that your calcium is even less available. So that is on top of that. So let's have a look. We already showed you or told you what are the signs and behavior of the birds, but you can also have an effect, you will also have an effect on the eggs that you can see. So I think for the farmers or people working in the packing station, it's important also to look at the egg signals. So what we see here, because we do lots of tests to monitor egg quality, so we will look at the albumin content and the quality of the albumin. Also the yolk will change, and then the most obvious thing is probably the external signs that we can see and in these eggs, which we call mottled eggs or cracked eggs. Heat stress will have an effect on an eggshell. So that is one way that you will see signs in the first stage of heat stress already. And it's important to, because I want to explain to you how we get these mottled eggs or differences in shell formation. And also it will be important later on to see what you can do about it. So what I show here in this slide is the formation of the egg, which after ovulation, your yolk is dropped into the oviduct, and then passes through the magnum where your white is made, then it goes to the isthmus where the shell membranes are made before it gets to the uterus. So that's the last phase, is where your shell is made. And that takes about 3-4 hours to complete that. And it starts with, if you see in the initial phase, for the shell formation, you have on the shell membranes, you have these mammillary knots, we call them. And on top of that, we get the formation with first amorphous calcium and then calcite crystals that will gradually, in time, form the egg, where the last part of your egg shell to complete is formed in the last hour before egg deposition is your cuticula. And what you see and the way the calcite crystals are deposited on these mammillary knots will make changes in the way your eggshell is constructed. And that's important to know, because you see these mottled eggs, it can be in different degrees, you can even, there's a scoring for that. So what you see is these spots, and particularly if you look with a lamp on it, or if you candle them, you can see that you have these spots on these eggs. And if you look carefully here, it's the same thing that I showed you in the former slides, but you can see here these palisade layers are supposed to be straight. And the pores that you see are supposed to be straight down. If you get stress or disease, the way the calcium carbonate columns and the protein matrix is going to be formed and structured is going to be different. Stress, particularly heat stress, also other diseases can affect this protein synthesis and the way the palisade columns are organized. And if, because of stress, because of disease, they are not well organized, you get in the pores that you can see moisture accumulation between these columns, and in the end, the eggshell and the membranes will separate. And that is what the discoloration that you see on these mottled eggs, in fact, results from separation between eggshell and egg membranes. So that's the effect of heat stress on laying birds. And now the most important thing, because you want to get some information how you can support layers in hot climate to avoid these losses in performance and losses in eggshell quality. So what can be done? I recommend this article to you. It gives a nice overview what can be done to mitigate heat stress. But in big lines, there are heat-resistant breeds that you can use, more breeds that are more resistant to heat. There's, of course, a big part management and housing that is important, but I want to focus on nutrition, what you can do there. Because, as I said, you have some, we see that in high climates, you have reduction in performance, and there are some breeds, like the one on the picture here, with the naked neck gene, some breeds that you can have cross breeds where you interbreed with these breeds with those genes. You see that they have less feathers, which means that in fact they can cope better with the heat. Another type of gene is coping breeds that have this dwarf gene, which makes that the body size is reduced. They have a little bit less eggs in number and in size, but they are less prone to have bad effects from heat stress, so they cope better. So they will have, compared to normal breeds, even if you have heat stress, they still get an acceptable number of eggs. The weight doesn't suffer too much, so that implies that you also have less, that you will have a constant egg mass, and their body weight. They are usually smaller birds, and that's why layers in tropical countries make sure you select the right breed. That's on the breeding side, but leave that to the bigger Aviagens and Hendrix companies. What you can do, and what is very important, I think, and to anticipate for periods that you will have heat stress, is that you find out what is the best thing for you in your climate conditions, because in some places relative humidity is low, so then you will have, it will help a lot if you have upcooling, if you have sprinklers, but if you have high relative humidity, this will not cool down, it doesn't really work. There, the only thing to do is what you see in the picture here, is make sure that the birds can cool down by convection, so that you remove the hot air from there. And so what you need then is airspeed, big ventilators, big inlets that can really take the air over the birds and circulate it so that they can get rid of their heat in that way. So that's management, breeding, but I think what is important definitely is what you can do to anticipate and to help and manage heat stress, is that you are aware of some nutritional strategies that can be applied. So some of this is about energy, protein, also electrolytes, and then, as we said, feed intake is less, or should be encouraged. All the smaller elements, vitamins, microelements, are also very important, because you need, for all the physiological processes to be able to go on, and you need these vitamins, you need these microelements, so that's important. And in general, if you can optimize digestibility and reduce oxidative stress, that will also be a big help to cope with heat stress. And there's lots of additives that can help you with that. And a very important factor, I think, is water, because they will reduce feed intake, they will still drink. So to have your water supply and quality in order is very important. And then there's a few feeding strategies that can help you, and the structure of the feed, the way you manage the timing of the feeding can also help to cope with heat stress. So if we look at formulation, it's important that when you have heat stress, you need more energy, but it has to be provided in an efficient way. Usually you will condense the feeds, and instead of what we very often do, we rely on the source for energy is carbohydrates. But in heat stress conditions, the digestion of fat and oil is much more efficient. It gives you less, it produces less heat. So definitely go from carbohydrate sources of energy to fat and oil, much better. So the advice is when you get above 27 degrees, that you will increase the energy level by 5%, but higher density, and you replace the carbohydrates by fat and oil. Also for the protein, because protein metabolism is producing a lot of heat, and you also not only to produce the protein, but also the end product, the waste product is nitrogen, so also that you have to get rid of. So our advice is to reduce the raw or the crude protein content by 1 to 1.5%. Again, when you are above this 27 degrees, and also not only the level of total protein, but make it more digestible, available. So use digestible amino acids instead of protein. Go more precise to amino acids. And there are a few that we know that are important, arginine, and specifically getting the right balance between arginine and lysine, threonine, and the ratio between threonine and lysine, because they are both important for the recovery. We said there's a big heat stress has a big impact on the intestines and the damage. So the sooner you can help to recover that, the better. So to recover, lower protein levels, but with a balanced amino acid composition. And then, of course, we talk heat stress, so that means that your electrolyte balance has to be in order and has to be more. You will need more dietary electrolytes than in non-heat stress conditions. So you will increase the amount of salts, mainly by putting sodium bicarbonate, but also depending on your situation, you have to look at your formulation, how it is ready. You can increase this dietary electrolyte balance up to 25 micro equivalent per kilogram. It can be done in drinking water or in feed, but of course you need to know in your situation, and there are places where already the water contains quite some salt. Also the feed formulation, you have to check what is going on, and then as needed, you add potassium chloride, sodium chloride, or sodium bicarbonate. So all this implies that you need always to have enough and cool water always available. That's very important. Then let's look at a few other elements that really help. Vitamin C. Because vitamin C has antioxidative effects. It helps to get that the redox balance back in place. It also helps, vitamin C helps the antioxidant activity of vitamin E. So they go together, right? And there's also some, we know with heat stress, you have an effect on the immune system. And so vitamin C, vitamin E will help you to improve the immune response, right? So the cell-mediated and the humoral response, both. Right? So vitamin C can also be put in feed, but also in water. Right? You have the amounts here to help you, but it's also important, these measures, like putting some vitamin C in the water, is something that you can do ad hoc when you listen to the broadcast, weather broadcast, and they say it's going to be hot, then do it before the heat strikes. So that's important, that these things are, these elements are in place before the damage gets done. Vitamin E and vitamin A, both antioxidant and immunomodulatory, and also vitamin D. We know that we need vitamin D, and specifically the one that is already transformed, is the vitamin hydroxy D3, is a better form to administer than the original one, because we need vitamin D to mobilize calcium for the eggshell formation and to regulate the calcium phosphate metabolism that is compromised when we have heat stress. And then I would not want to neglect these micro minerals. As I said, they play a role in multiple pathways in metabolism. So zinc, selenium, manganese, they're all important because they improve nutrient utilization. Some of them have an antioxidant effect. They help in your response. And it's also good to look for the right combinations of the vitamins, the calcium, and the micro elements to make sure that you can enhance that metabolism. And then one of the more important things, what I wanted to show you here, keep your water cool. So it's, I see a lot of black water tanks, painted white, so it takes less heat. Put a roof on top of it or something, or try to put it in the shade somewhere. That's very important. Because when we have heat stress, normally already birds drink almost twice as much as they eat. But in cases of heat stress, it can go up to 3-4 times. They drink more than they would eat. So it should always be there, clean, cool, and acclimated. So it should always be available. And of course, you have to control your quality of the water regularly. And because your water is usually the vehicle to put all the products that can help to cope with heat stress. The additives, the minerals, the vitamins, they will be added in the water. Birds will maybe not eat anymore, so what you put in the feed is not going to reach them, but they will still drink. So very important that you keep water quality tip-top. Then I insist on this holistic approach to intestinal health, because it is not only the feed that we put, it is important for immune response and for performance, that all this is in right balance. And if you have heat stress, you might have to do extra things to keep. More and more we learn that general health and intestinal health, in that, to keep that in balance, the microbiota have a very important role. So it's very good to realize that, and also to use this magic triangle when you deal with heat stress. And we have lots of, we go away more and more from using antibiotics because of antimicrobial resistance. But we have a lot of alternatives that have been developed, and they not only have a replacement for this when we deal with disease, but also to keep the balance of the microbiota in the intestinal tract. So we have organic acids, probiotics, prebiotics, and a lot of plant-derived products that more and more we learn about, and although they've been used for ages, but that can have a beneficial effect. Because if you look at these products that come from nature, they, in the plant itself, they are there to defend the plant against fungus, against some bacteria, and there's also different phenolic compounds there. They're inside the plants. They've been used for many years, and nowadays sometimes we think it's mainly their taste, but it is also because they have antipathogen activity against bacteria, fungus, and also they improve digestion. They increase the endogenous secretion of some enzymes. So that is also why we use them. If you look at the mode of action, a lot of it improves intestinal health because it have antioxidant properties, and they have an effect on tight junctions, and as I said, different pathogens. But they also have an effect on immunomodulation and can reduce the oxidative stress and the inflammation that is caused there. And not to neglect, they stimulate appetite, which, as we said, a natural reaction of the birds is in heat stress to stop eating. If we can find things to stimulate, that is important, because we have more, if we have more feed intake, we will get a better results. And then something that also has been, because there's lots of products that we have been using for some time, and I'm a believer in betaine because it has two functions. It's a native donor, so it converts homocysteine in methionine, and that has a sparing effect on the amino acids that you need. And it is a natural osmolyte, just like sodium and potassium. So it really regulates, it helps to maintain the osmolyte function. So it helps against the destruction of the cells. So it's a good protector in case of heat stress. So we looked at the nutritional strategies. Let's have a closer look at feeding strategies, more to do with structure and feed management in time. So should we use pellets or mash? The pellets can minimize heat stress, specifically in broilers, also in layers, because eating pellets takes less energy than eating mash. That's one thing. And you will have no feed selection. Any additive you put there, you are more sure that it will be. But if your birds are on a mash diet, it's also not a good idea to all of a sudden change to pellets, because that is not going to have the effect that you want. But then still look at the particle size inside. You need the right particle size inside the pellet, but also in your mash. And then other things that can be done in periods of heat stress is to not feed in the hottest period of the day. So early morning, late afternoon. Sometimes it also helps to give a midnight snack for the layers, specifically because that's when they are forming the eggshell. It really can help. And then for the providing at the time needed the calcium, it's a good idea to put limestone grits as a top dressing on the feed in the afternoon. So large particle size calcium that will stay in the gizzard for some time and will be released gradually. So that's a good way of dealing with heat stress regarding feed formulation. So in summary, the nutritional strategies for heat stress We will use higher density feed, and we have lower feed intake, so we have to give more dense feed. Increase the nutrient content to maintain the same amount of nutrient intake. Higher energy levels, more fat and oil instead of carbohydrates. Decrease the level of crude protein, but increase the digestibility and the amount of digestible amino acids. Use additives to, in general, have better digestion. So we talk about antioxidants, we talk about vitamins. We need to keep the electrolyte balance in place, and then we have some feed management strategies. So I'm at the end of my talk, and I hope I've given you some useful information, because heat stress has a big impact on egg production in shell quality, and it's not going to get better with climate change. So it's key to minimize the effect of heat stress. The key to minimize this effect is really to anticipate in periods of high temperature. And everybody has to know in his region when action should be taken and to take preventive measures in management and nutrition before you get the rise of the temperature and the humidity and really the effects of heat stress. Try to prevent it before. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll be ready for any questions later. Thank you.